There's a moment, small and almost invisible, when something inside you quietly rearranges itself. You stop waiting for the apology that was never actually coming. You stop replaying old conversations, searching desperately for the exact point where everything fell apart. You stop asking yourself why they treated you the way they did. And in that moment, with no dramatic scene, no big confrontation, no final speech, you simply stop caring. Not because you gave up on yourself, not because you're somehow broken, but because you finally woke up. And that particular moment is the one thing that terrifies them the most. Not your anger, not your tears, not even your absence. What genuinely unravels a narcissist at their core is your indifference. Because indifference means, in their mind, that they've lost. And losing isn't something a narcissist was ever built to withstand. If you've ever felt the strange psychological weight of being with someone who seemed almost addicted to controlling how you feel, someone who couldn't stand watching you be happy without them, someone who turned ice cold the second you stopped needing their approval, then this is exactly for you. What you're about to understand is going to change how you see yourself, how you see them, and how you move through the rest of your life. Most people who go through this kind of dynamic spend years afterward wondering what actually happened to them, replaying scenes, searching for the one explanation that would finally make sense of it all. What follows is that explanation, laid out plainly, without the confusion that made it so hard to see clearly while you were still inside it. To really understand why your indifference becomes their undoing, you first need to understand what a narcissist actually feeds on. And it isn't love. Love is far too unpredictable, too generous, too free-flowing for what they need. What a narcissist actually feeds on is your emotional reactivity, your need for their approval, your fear of disappointing them, your desperate attempts to fix something that was never yours to fix in the first place. Every time you cried in front of them, they felt genuinely powerful. Every time you begged them for an explanation, they felt needed. Every time you got angry, every time you fought back, every time you finally broke down, you were feeding a hunger that was never actually going to be satisfied, no matter how much you gave it. Here's the part that's genuinely going to sting a little. You weren't really in a relationship with them in the way you thought you were. You were more like a source, an emotional fuel tank. And the entire architecture of how they behaved around you, the hot and cold cycling, the love bombing followed by cold silence, the moments of warmth immediately followed by calculated cruelty, all of it was designed, whether consciously or not, to keep you emotionally activated, to keep you reacting, to keep you needing them in some form. Because a narcissist's sense of self was never built internally. It was never rooted in their own identity, their own values, their own quiet, private sense of worth. It's entirely external instead. It lives inside other people's reactions to them. It lives in being admired, being feared, being needed, being chased after. When you looked at them with visible hurt in your eyes, they felt real. When you raged at them, they felt significant. When you pleaded with them, they felt powerful. You weren't just another person in their life. You were the mirror that made them feel like they existed at all. And then one day, you simply stopped looking into that mirror. Something quietly broke open inside you. Maybe it happened slowly, across months or years of being gaslit, diminished, and quietly erased piece by piece. Or maybe it happened all at once, some final act of cruelty that crossed a line so far that something inside you simply went silent afterward. But however it happened, the result ended up being the same. The emotional charge that used to tie you to them started dissolving. The anxiety loosened its grip. That obsessive need to understand them, to fix things between you, to somehow finally be enough for them, began fading away. You started sleeping through the night again. You started genuinely laughing again. You started making plans that no longer included them at all. And for the first time in a long time, you didn't feel guilty about any of it. You were healing. You just didn't realize yet how genuinely dangerous that healing was to them. Here's what actually happens on their end of things. At first, they don't fully notice, or rather, they notice but don't register it as any real threat because they can't quite believe it's actually happening. Narcissists fundamentally can't conceive of a world where you're genuinely free of them. Their entire internal model of you is built on the belief that you need them, that you're emotionally dependent on them, that no matter how far you drift away, you'll always eventually come crawling back. So when your energy starts changing, when your responses get noticeably shorter, when the desperation drains completely out of your voice, their first instinct isn't panic, it's dismissal. They tell themselves you're just playing some kind of game, that you're punishing them, that this is simply another emotional move designed to grab their attention. And if they wait long enough or ignore you long enough, surely you'll crack and come back the way you always used to before. So they wait, they watch. And for a while, they're perfectly comfortable in their certainty that this whole thing is temporary. But then time keeps passing, and you don't crack after all. You don't text first. You don't obsessively check their social media. You don't manufacture flimsy reasons to be near them anymore. You simply exist in a way that no longer orbits around them at all. And something starts stirring inside them, something ancient and deeply uncomfortable. A slow, creeping, nauseating realization that this time might genuinely be different from every other time before. This is when the first wave of real narcissistic panic sets in. Not rage yet, not manipulation yet, something quieter and far more unsettling than either of those, a kind of existential vertigo because the mirror that used to confirm their entire existence just went dark, and without your reflection bouncing back at them, they can't quite see themselves clearly anymore. Watch closely what happens next, because this is exactly where their behavior becomes almost clinically predictable, almost as though they're following a script written into their psychology long before they ever even met you. The first thing they typically do is test the waters subtly and carefully. A random message, casual in tone, deliberately designed to seem like it means absolutely nothing. A memory they claim to have randomly stumbled across. A small detail about something the two of you once shared, sent at a moment when they've calculated your defenses might be down. They aren't reaching out because they genuinely miss you, at least not in the way a healthy person misses someone they love. They're reaching out because they need to confirm they still have access to your emotional core. They need to know the door is technically still open, even if they have absolutely no intention of ever walking back through it. If you respond with any warmth at all, even just a fraction of it, the relief they feel is immediate and intense, not because they actually value you, but because the mirror lit back up, the fuel supply returned, the threat of becoming irrelevant passed for now. They won't escalate that into any real reconnection. They'll simply withdraw again, slightly satisfied, their anxiety quieted for a while, and the whole cycle starts reasserting itself all over again. But if you respond with pure neutrality instead, or don't respond at all, something far more interesting begins happening. The second wave hits, and this second wave is genuinely different from the first. This isn't quiet vertigo anymore. This is the beginning of real disturbance inside them because your non-reaction has communicated something their psyche genuinely cannot process easily. That you aren't playing some kind of game. That you aren't simply waiting for them to notice your distance so you can punish them with it. That your silence isn't a weapon being aimed directly at them. It's simply where you live now, a place where they're no longer the center of your emotional world at all. And to a narcissist, that isn't just rejection. That's a form of annihilation to their sense of self. This next part matters enormously because it reveals nearly everything about how they actually operate underneath the surface. A narcissist doesn't genuinely fear your hate toward them. They can metabolize hate easily. Hate means you're still emotionally invested in them somehow. Hate means they still matter to you, still occupy real space inside your mind, still hold the power to generate some kind of response from you. What they genuinely cannot metabolize or process is your peace. Your peace tells them you've moved somewhere they simply cannot follow you to, a place where their opinion of you no longer determines your own opinion of yourself. And that happens to be the one place their control can never reach again. Now here's where their behavior starts escalating into something that can feel genuinely confusing if you don't understand what you're actually looking at. The narcissist who once discarded you, ignored you, made you feel completely invisible, suddenly becomes strangely available again. Suddenly they remember your birthday out of nowhere. Suddenly they have some reason to be wherever you happen to be. Suddenly they start performing vulnerability in ways that feel almost genuinely convincing. They'll tell mutual friends or acquaintances that they're worried about you, that you seem different lately, that they hope you're doing okay, not because they're actually worried about your well-being, but because this particular performance creates a narrative where they're positioned as the caring one and you're recast as the cold one. It subtly repositions them as the person still reaching out, the person who still cares, which means they get to reframe your indifference as cruelty on your part instead. This is honestly one of the most insidious things they do. When they can't provoke any direct reaction out of you, they start working the social periphery around you instead. They plant small seeds here and there, minor comments to mutual friends, family members, coworkers, nothing overt enough that anyone could really call it out directly, just enough to make people slightly uncertain about you, just enough to create small fires they hope will eventually force you to engage with them again in order to defend yourself. Because the moment you engage at all, even in anger, the game is back on for them. The supply starts flowing again. The mirror lights back up. Don't take that bait, no matter how tempting it becomes. This is genuinely one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do, because the instinct to defend yourself is completely natural and completely human. But understand what's actually happening in those moments. Every time you feel that pull to explain yourself, to correct the record, to make people finally see the truth of the situation, You're feeling the exact same old activation response they spent months or years carefully engineering inside you. The feeling that you somehow owe them your emotional energy, that their narrative deserves a counter-narrative from you, that silence must mean guilt on your part. It doesn't. Silence simply means you've left the arena entirely. And the one thing a narcissist genuinely cannot survive is an audience that has already walked out on them. Let's go a little deeper here because there's a psychological phenomenon happening inside the narcissist during this specific phase that most people never actually get to witness or understand. And understanding it fully will free you from whatever chains are still quietly connecting you to them. When a narcissist loses their grip on your emotions, they don't simply feel sad the way a healthy person feels sad after a relationship genuinely ends. They experience something far more destabilizing than that, something closer to what psychologists call narcissistic injury, a wound that strikes directly at the foundation of their entire constructed self-image. Remember, their identity was never built on anything internal to begin with. It's built entirely on external confirmation instead. It's built on the belief that they're special, superior, uniquely powerful in their ability to affect the people around them emotionally. When you stop being affected by them, that entire belief system starts cracking apart. And the terror living underneath that crack isn't grief. And it isn't loneliness either, at least not in the way you personally experience loneliness. It's the terror of non-existence itself. The terror that without your reaction, without your ongoing need for them, they're somehow less real, less significant, less than they believe themselves to be. And that terror, once it reaches a certain pitch, eventually curdles into fury. This is the third wave, the rage itself, and it can show up in several different forms depending on the person. Some narcissists become coldly, calculatedly vengeful. They escalate whatever smear campaign they've already started. They tell more people more damaging things about you. They attempt to isolate you professionally or socially wherever they can. They use whatever leverage they still have access to, shared children, joint finances, mutual history between you, to try forcing some kind of interaction, any interaction at all, because even a fight feels better to them than the void of your genuine indifference. Other narcissists collapse inward instead. They become suddenly dramatically fragile. They reach out with messages so raw, so seemingly vulnerable that you end up feeling guilty for simply having your own peace. They'll use their own pain as a weapon against you, not necessarily because that pain is fake. The pain may actually be entirely real, but because they're wielding it deliberately as a tool to reestablish emotional access to you, to make you feel responsible for their suffering all over again, to drag you back into the caretaker role where they know exactly how to manage and control you. And some narcissists do both at once. They oscillate wildly between rage and collapse, between punishment and desperate appeal, between icy coldness and manufactured warmth, because they're essentially throwing everything they have at the wall to see what finally cracks you back open. What they're really searching for is the lever, the specific emotional trigger that still works reliably on you, the thing that still makes you drop your boundaries and reach back toward them instinctively. And if you've genuinely done the internal work, if you've truly arrived at real indifference rather than suppressed pain simply wearing indifference like a mask, they won't find that lever anymore. It genuinely isn't there for them to pull. Here's a truth the world doesn't tell people often enough. Healing from this kind of dynamic isn't just personal. In a real sense, it's political too. Every single time a person walks away from a narcissist with their dignity fully intact and their emotional core genuinely unreachable, they've won something that extends beyond just their individual story. Because a narcissist's entire power depends completely on your belief that you need them, on your belief that their approval somehow makes you real, on your belief that their cruelty reflects some actual truth about your own worth. The moment you stop believing any of those things, not just intellectually understanding it, but believing it in that deep, wordless place where your actual sense of self lives, their entire architecture of power over you collapses completely, not slowly either, all at once, like a building whose foundation has suddenly been removed from underneath it. And what rises up in its place inside you is something they never wanted you to discover. Sovereignty. The knowledge that your emotional world genuinely belongs to you and to no one else. That your peace was never a reward they could grant or withhold from you. That your worth was never a verdict they had any real authority to deliver in the first place. You become, in the truest psychological sense of the phrase, ungovernable. And for someone who spent years trying desperately to govern you, that outcome is the single most devastating thing imaginable to them. It's worth sitting with what that word actually means in this context, because sovereignty isn't the same thing as coldness or numbness. It doesn't mean you stop feeling things or that you've somehow hardened yourself against the world. It means the source of your emotional stability moved from outside you to inside you permanently. It means someone can be angry with you and you can still sleep that night. It means someone can withdraw their approval and you don't go scrambling to earn it back. That shift, once it genuinely takes hold, tends to be one of the most permanent and quietly transformative things that can happen to a person. Think for a moment about everything you've actually been through. Think about all those nights you spent quietly dismantling yourself, trying desperately to understand why you were somehow never enough for them. Think about how many times you contorted your own emotions, your own needs, your very sense of reality itself, all in an attempt to keep the peace between you, to avoid the cold silence that always followed conflict, to earn back some scrap of warmth that always seemed to stay just out of reach no matter what you did. Think about the version of yourself that apologized for things that genuinely weren't your fault, that shrank itself down to make room for someone who was never actually going to make room for you in return. That version of you wasn't weak in any way. That version of you was surviving something genuinely difficult and painful. But you're not in survival mode anymore, you're in emergence now. And emergence looks exactly like what you're likely experiencing right now. The quieting of that desperate need to be understood by them specifically. The dawning realization that their opinion of you was never actually an accurate reflection of who you really are. The ability to hold the memory of everything that happened without being destroyed by it all over again. The capacity to genuinely wish them nothing at all, not goodwill toward them, not suffering either, simply nothing, and to genuinely mean it. Nothing is actually the most powerful thing you can ever give a narcissist. Nothing is exactly what they can't process, can't weaponize against you, and genuinely can't survive emotionally. Nothing is the final frontier of your own freedom from them. There's one more thing worth understanding about this entire process because it fundamentally changes how you look at everything that happened to you. The narcissist who's now scrambling, performing, raging, collapsing, throwing everything in their psychological arsenal at you in an attempt to recapture your attention and your emotional reactivity isn't doing any of this because they genuinely love you. They might use that specific word. They might even genuinely believe that word applies to whatever they're feeling in the moment. But what they're actually experiencing isn't love for you at all. It's panic about themselves instead. It's the terror of facing an empty mirror. It's the unbearable confrontation with a self that, without external validation constantly feeding it, they simply don't know how to hold together on their own. That was never your responsibility to fix for them. It was never your job to begin with. You cannot love someone into wholeness when they're using your love as a substitute for actually doing the work of becoming whole themselves. You cannot sacrifice your own psychological health on the altar of someone else's avoidance and refusal to grow. And truly recognizing that, recognizing it at a cellular level rather than just intellectually, isn't callousness on your part at all. It's clarity. It's actually the single most compassionate thing you can do, first for yourself and ultimately, in a strange way, even for them, because your refusal to keep enabling their dysfunction is honestly the closest thing to a genuine wake-up call they'll ever receive in their life. Some of them will never actually wake up from this pattern. Some will simply move on to the next available source, the next mirror, the next person whose emotional world they can quietly colonize instead. And that next person will likely go through something very similar to what you went through yourself. But that isn't your burden to carry anymore. You've already paid your dues in that particular school of pain. You've genuinely earned your graduation from it. And here's what that graduation actually looks like in practice. It looks like an ordinary Tuesday morning where you wake up and your very first thought isn't about them at all. It looks like a conversation with someone new where you're fully present instead of quietly haunted by old patterns. It looks like making a decision, whether small or genuinely significant, based entirely on what you actually want and who you actually are, without that invisible filter of their potential judgment running constantly in the background of your mind. It looks like silence that no longer feels painful. It looks like solitude that genuinely feels like good company instead of loneliness. It looks like the slow, almost astonishing return of yourself back to yourself piece by piece. It looks like noticing one ordinary afternoon that an entire day has gone by without their name crossing your mind at all and feeling nothing but quiet relief when you realize it. It looks like being able to hear a song that used to wreck you and simply enjoying the song again. None of these moments arrive with fanfare. They arrive quietly, almost sneaking up on you, which is exactly why so many people miss them or fail to give themselves credit for how far they've actually come. You aren't the same person who first entered that dynamic all that time ago. You genuinely can't be. What you went through carved you out and reshaped you in ways that are probably still revealing themselves to you even now. There are capacities inside you now for real discernment, for firm boundaries, for genuine emotional intelligence that were forged specifically in experiences that nearly broke you at the time. Don't minimize what it actually took to arrive at this point. Don't rush past the sheer magnitude of what you've survived and what you've genuinely become as a result of surviving it. Because here's the final and most important truth in everything you've read today. The moment you genuinely stop caring about a narcissist's opinion of you, you didn't lose anything at all. You didn't fail at the relationship in any meaningful sense. You didn't give up, and you certainly didn't give in either. You reclaimed something that was always rightfully yours and had been taken from you so gradually that you barely even noticed it disappearing in the first place. You reclaimed the authorship of your own emotional life. The understanding that your feelings genuinely belonged to you to feel and were never theirs to manage or control. That your peace was never up for negotiation with anyone. That your worth was never conditional on someone else's approval. That your own story doesn't require their endorsement in order to be true and valid. Right now, they're likely standing in an empty room somewhere, still looking for a mirror that simply isn't there anymore, and you're outside in the actual light, slowly remembering who you were before someone taught you to be afraid of your own wholeness in the first place. That isn't nothing. That is genuinely everything. If you've made it this far, you probably already know why. Because something in these words found something in you that had been quietly waiting to be found all along. Something that needed to be named, seen, and honored properly. You aren't crazy. You were never too sensitive. You were never the actual problem in that dynamic. You never were, no matter what you were told to believe. And the clarity you feel right now, that quiet, fierce, almost sacred sense of recognition settling into your chest that belongs entirely to you now. Nobody can ever take that away from you again. You aren't starting over from nothing here. You're starting from a genuine place of earned wisdom that most people spend an entire lifetime searching for without ever finding. The narcissist didn't break you, not really. What they actually did was break open the version of you that had always been too small for who you were genuinely meant to become. Welcome to the rest of your life. You've already been through more than enough. Now it's finally time to simply be.